Okay, right. Hello, Callum. How are you?
I am fabulous, Aiden. How about yourself?
I am very good. Very excited to be talking about DevOps in App Connect Enterprise.
How can you not be excited?
Do you want to introduce yourself, Callum? What do you do at IBM?
Why not? So I am the Worldwide Technology Expert Labs practice leader for integration and also app runtimes.
Now, I'm Aiden Gallagher, the solution architect within Technology Expert Labs UKI. I'm market-based, but do a very similar role to you, Callum, as you know.
We do. Work together quite often.
We do. Successfully most of the time.
Always successfully, Aiden. Always
successfully. So we've sat here together to talk about why is DevOps important for App Connect? Why are people talking about automation? What are the specifics of App Connect automation? So I don't know if you wanted to start us off with why is DevOps important? Why should people be listening to us?
Yeah. So if we kind of start off and think about just DevOps on its own, like what are people really trying to do and what do they hope it's going to deliver other than being a key buzzword at the moment? It's all about automation, and it's all about trying to see how we can do things quicker, faster, cheaper, and kind of react to the business as quickly as possible based on what they need. And that sounds like even more buzzwords, which is so maybe it's worth me just explaining a little bit more. Is DevOps to me is instead of you actually having a human doing a deployment or having a human upgrading some software or have a human completing some regression tests, we have a system which is going to do that instead. We have something else which we've automated. We've told it how to do it because there's never any magic in IT. We've told how to do it, and we click a button or maybe schedule it to happen, and it automatically does that for us.
And I think that's an interesting part there. So there's the question of what triggers a automation in the first place. So you said there about somebody pressing a button or something being scheduled. I think automation doesn't necessarily have to be automatic. So if you're talking about automatically taking a change in one place and automatically making a change in another, doesn't have to be that way. That is a method of doing automation, but for customers who want more control, you can decouple the two and have somebody press a button and say, yes, this is right, I approve this, this is a good automation, let's go.
Exactly. So you imagine like a developer's making a code change, and then they get to the point of checking something in. It's quite reasonable that that might be built into an artifact, and it might then be tested for the developer to check some simple things out to make sure that it's all good. But you wouldn't then expect that just automatically to then get rolled out into production, into a multinational financial institution. It's just not going to happen. Okay, it's just that there's more checks and balances which are in place, and good, reasonable checks and balances which are put in place, where that it just wouldn't happen in the real world. Instead, there's a human being who will, at certain parts of that journey to live, will want to jump in and say, hold on a minute, let me just have a check that everything is being done. And maybe over time, you reduce the number of checks. So you make that more straightforward all the way to route to live. But I'm personally very skeptical that anyone would actually put it automatically all the way into live without a human being double checking that.
It's the cynic in you, Callum.
I know.
Okay, so that's DevOps. Why is DevOps important? I suppose, what is ACE? Let's assume everybody does know what App Connect Enterprise is, but for those who don't, who just like the sound of our voice and have been drawn in, what is ACE? What is App Connect?
So ACE as a kind of core technology actually started off close to probably about 20 years ago, and it's had many different names over the time. The three most recent names are WebSphere Message Broker, IBM Integration Bus, and App Connect Enterprise. And it's been an evolution of the technology. But what does it do? It connects applications and systems together, and it aggregates data together from various different systems and provides that back to who is calling. So it's an integration core technology. And that probably leads us on to, like, what do people then do? What do people build on it? They build flows, which kind of connect one system to another system or gathers data and aggregates it all together. And so when we actually think of someone building that flow, well, that's an artifact that then needs to be built into a kind of deployment unit, which could be then deployed in. And so that's where kind of the DevOps world may start plugging in the case of App Connect, or one example of it.
So is there only one type of automation in App Connect, Callum?
Yeah, great question. So often people kind of think, right, I've got my development artifact, I've got my integration, I've got my building blocks and my flow. I just want to automate the deployment of that. But that's only one piece of the jigsaw. And there's actually the final piece on the top. When we think about automation, there's many different layers, and it's like a layered cake. The first layer is saying, right, have I actually got the underlying compute resources provisioned out that I need? So that's your VMs provisioned out. So there's some level of infrastructure automation which is provided there. Then the next layer is actually saying, right, I've got an integration kind of platform technology that I'm going to deploy. And in our case, that would be something like App Connect Enterprise, or for others who know, we've also got Web Methods integration as another possible integration technology there. And often that could be something like the Cloud Pak for integration, which is a bundle of integration capabilities together. So we're going to have some mechanism to deploy the platform or deploy the binaries onto that compute resource that we have. And so we'll call that integration platform automation. And then on top of that, it's quite often that we have a multi-tenant environment. Okay, so for instance, it could be that we have different lines of business using the same infrastructure. Or it could be that we've got a non-production environment and we have a development section, we have a unit test section, we have a pre-production section. So we have kind of different, we want to segment up that infrastructure that we've got so we can host multiple things. So we'll call that environment or tenant automation, some way of provisioning that new environment and tenant. And then it's only then right at the top, when we've got our flow that we want to deploy out, well, we deploy that out and we automate that out as part of the kind of application CI/CD process. So we've got all of these various different layers working together to give us an end-to-end.
Perfect. And I was just thinking then that in a SaaS environment, presumably then you only have the artifact to worry about, and potentially some of those like certificates and things like that go directly to the SaaS deployment.
Yeah, that's fair. There's a lot less of the layers that you need to worry about. And that's the beauty of SaaS. You don't have the infrastructure. You don't really have the platform in the same manner. The environment and the tenant is really where you start. You'd ask your SaaS environment, either using APIs or doing that manually, to say, provision me out a new tenant or a new environment so that I can actually then deploy my application or integration onto that environment.
So we've talked about these layers. Do you think those layers are, is it one team? Is it multiple teams? Does it matter?
No, good point. And in general, it's multiple teams. There isn't generally, especially with the larger clients, one team that would do all of this automation. It's actually can be separated into, integration teams, or application teams, and application teams also build those integrations at the very top level. We then get kind of centralized integration teams who may do the automation for the tenants and the platform. And then we get networking and infrastructure SMEs who are in charge of doing the infrastructure. Exactly the same as we have today, that we have a different team who are provisioning out VMs, to those that are actually provisioning out or installing software, to those that are building the applications. They're different teams. They still have a need. They still need to actually build out their own automation to provide it across all of the layers.
Do you think that's been changing over time? So when I first started doing containerized deployments, I was finding that it tended to be a specific small team doing everything themselves in an estate, while they're sort of demoing for organizations. This is containers, it does work. we can change our models, the world won't explode. I found that it's a lot more formal now. So there is a platform team who are responsible for OpenShift. They've got the skills and the knowledge. They deploy the underlying infrastructure. They deploy, say, the operators, and then the application or traditional middleware teams might be deploying some of the App Connect integration runtimes, and then an application team just provides the flow. In other use cases, I see actually that there's no differentiation between middleware and application teams. Application teams are just picking up in CP3, for example, or containers. They're just picking up how to run the App Connect custom resource, and they're just plugging the bar file directly in. Does that match what you've been seeing?
Yeah, most definitely. Like customers have started off when they're looking at containers and also DevOps, they're looking at things as this is an incubator project. And when it's an incubator project, quite often you want all of your resources that have to do things for you within that one team. So you end up doing all of these layers together. But then when you want to, shall we say, productionize it or do it out to the wider enterprise, you find that incubator team actually needs to expand out. And we end up having separate teams for each of these layers quite often, sometimes not a team for each layer, but certainly they realize they're taking on that responsibility within a combined team. And yeah, as people transition from incubator to that more enterprise-wide adoption, generally that's when we see that the number of teams kind of expand out.
Perfect. So I've taken us slightly far away from automation and DevOps because I've started talking about layers of App Connect. I know it's important from an automation perspective because we need to know what we're automating and who needs to automate those things. Go on, here's a clarifier for me probably. We talk about automation, we talk about DevOps, we talk about DevSecOps, we talk about CI/CD. What's the difference? What are we actually talking about when we talk about DevOps? What are we talking about when we talk about DevSecOps? And what's the difference between CI, continuous integration, and CD, continuous deployment, continuous development? There's different phrases.
Exactly. And so there's lots of buzzwords and terminology here. And so CI/CD is really part of DevOps and DevSecOps. And what's the difference when we add in that word or phrase sec into it and change it from DevOps to DevSecOps? Well, in practice, what that means is we're going to worry about not only the development and the operations, but we're also going to worry about security concerns as well. But let's try and make it a bit more concrete again. Okay, so what does that mean in the case of App Connect, and what does that change? Well, it means we'll worry about how do we create certificates? How do we make sure that whatever we're deploying out has valid certificates which have been generated in a controlled way? Then potentially we'll worry about, do we need to do some code scanning to make sure that there isn't any vulnerabilities in anything that we've created? Then we'll maybe say, shall we do some container level image scanning to make sure there's no vulnerabilities within the container, because additional elements could have been embedded within that container, maybe without our knowledge or with our knowledge, but we want to scan it and make sure that they don't have those. So that's the introduction of what the sec means. And then if we turn to looking at CI/CD, which is a part of the whole DevSecOps process, it's really focused on how do I build my artifacts into a deployment unit, and then how do I deploy those out onto a runtime so that they can be executed. And so that's the separation between CI and CD. CI is really how do I get those artifacts into a form which is built and ready, and then how do I execute that out? Now, I missed one important point which is worth saying is about testing. And you can actually do testing in both parts of that CI and CD as well. So you can have testing at each parts of those, but think of it, at least in your head, as really, I'm building something and then I'm deploying something out as being those two parts of the CI and CD.
So at the CI level, that's the original build of the artifact.
Yeah.
So there we might be looking at things like in ACE v12, we introduced the unit test functionality, which generates Java tests within the App Connect product. You can generate them with a recorded message. So what you might do is take those recorded messages, generate some unit tests, and then use them as your update them as you're changing functionality which you can either use then as a regression test or as a function test, an initial unit test for your functions as you go through pipeline.
Exactly. Like quite often what you're going to do is try and do those unit test kind of scenarios as part of the CI part. Once you've built the artifact, you want to do some unit testing on those. But then for you to do further steps of the testing, which will require other external systems, well, you've got to deploy that out into an environment for doing that. And so you can actually view all of this is almost like chains of CI/CDs that are going on as you kind of move that through the environments and move that towards live.
And thinking about it, another thing we have done in the past is spun up containers for performance testing as we've gone through the continuous deployment. So we've actually added some JMeter tests, for example, to the app connect flows. That way, if we change something at, say, the OpenShift side or the VM side, we can actually test the performance hasn't changed. And because the sort of deployment process is the same, you've got the same conditions each time. So it is like for like.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually probably an important point for us to say is that CI/CD can be done with VMs and it can be done with containers. There's no right or wrong. Just from what I've seen, it's a bit harder to do with VMs than it is with containers. Containers, it's a little bit easier because they spin up quicker. You can pre-build them and layer things in, so it's a bit more natural. But if you try hard enough, you can do it all with VMs as well. And that's one of the beauties of containers, like to your point, of you can just spin up a performance environment and give it a go. Yeah, you can do that with VMs. It just takes a bit longer and it's a bit harder to probably orchestrate everything together to make sure that that's working.
We're going to get angry messages from broker users who have been doing a form of DevOps on Solaris and old school VMs for the last 15 years.
And it's a good point, actually, because we create these terms in IT of new terms and DevOps and CI/CD and all of these kind of things. But many of these things aren't actually new. We could have put the term, or let's script this and let's automate that, and previously. And a lot of it is the foundations and the same kind of things that we're talking about there is what we're talking about here. It's just a case of there are new technologies and new approaches for actually doing that. And it's gaining more traction because people realize that they actually need to do these operations more often. And that actually just hits my mind that that's an important point here. Why are we doing some of this is because we have to do these things more often than what we had to do before. And the most obvious is something like a security update or a patching for particular product versions. We used to do product updates, security patches, maybe on a yearly basis, product updates, maybe even every 5 years in some cases for some customers. Now we can't do that because of security requirements and the risk to the organization. If you have security vulnerabilities, you have to be doing that on a weekly, monthly, or at the worst, quarterly basis. And that's just what you need to be doing, or you're risking your business. And because you're moving to that model that you're doing it so much more frequently, then you need to ensure you can do it quicker and you can do it cheaper. And the way to do that is automation.
Especially if you're following good agile integration architecture practices, Callum, and you've decoupled and decentralized your race flows so that you can fire off lots of ACEs running side by side, and they all need security updates or certificate updates or code changes or whatever it is, and you could do them independently and isolated, and then automation helps you do that decoupling. There you go. I don't know who wrote that red book. Do you?
Some brilliant people, I'm sure.
Fantastic. Where is Kim? So we've talked a little about what DevOps is, what ACE is, what things you might automate in ACE, and I suppose we've touched on some of the benefits. But what are the tangible benefits if somebody listening wants to go to their business and say, "Oh, we really should invest in automating our ACE pipelines"? What's the value they're going to get from that? What can they go tell the business users?
The biggest, I don't go to a single customer who doesn't say, we find it difficult to upgrade. Nearly every customer says it takes too long to upgrade. They all have that challenges, and that's a challenge because it takes them months, if not years worth of effort for doing that upgrade. The simplest thing to kind of bite off is to say, I want to change that from being months to years to move an entire upgrade to be days or weeks instead of months and years. And that is benefit one. The other benefit is that it can mean that day-to-day operations can be completed with far less skill than what necessarily had. If it's just pipelines and starting the pipelines, obviously you need to maintain them. And if it's just running those pipelines, that becomes very trivial, and it almost becomes product agnostic for running those. Obviously, you still need to be able to have highly skilled people for where you hit issues, but it's incredibly valuable from that. And because
can I jump in?
Yeah,
I'll jump in slightly on that one. So I was coming off a workshop with somebody yesterday, and they're effectively saying that expertise is declining. There's a lot more people can know. There's a lot more things people can be experts in. People have been working, as you say, on ACE for 20 years. Probably are thinking about putting their feet up, going off to a beach somewhere, a bit of a holiday, and the amount of depth of quality in some products is declining. What that means, I think, is that there are lots of good expertise out there, but they possibly are looking after lots of different products. Their knowledge base is being spread much more thinly across multiple products. We talk about full stack developers now, for example. And obviously the introduction of AI was sort of to help full stack developers and people having to know a little bit of everything become more efficient. So I'd completely agree on you in that you can do a bit more with a bit less, with fewer expertise, fewer like people who have the expertise, because they're building the automate. I think what you're saying is they're building the automations, and that allows practitioners to just run them, basically the app teams who might not need to know ACE very well.
Yeah, far more eloquently put, the point I was trying to make. Yeah, exactly. Completely agree with you. And it probably is worth then saying that all of this automation, not only does it help with the upgrades, but it then also helps with rolling out new changes and new integrations, because it speeds up that whole process. Because if you have a framework and you can push it through these environments, that speeds up when someone comes to you and says, I need this change or I need this new integration. You can actually do that far quicker. And because you can do it far quicker, it means you've got probably more time to also think about what unit tests and regression tests that I can do, which then feed into the quality element, that feed into the idea that it's higher quality. And the other beautiful thing, because this is all about repeatability, if you do find that you've made a mistake and you find that you got a bug, when you fix the bug, you create a unit test as well, or a regression test, and you put that in to make sure that in the future you don't hit that same issue again. And if you do, the testing framework for your regression test will pick that up and tell you way before you get anywhere near production. And
the toolkit now has what's the next integration, does it not? It has AI integration on the Eclipse toolkit, so you can always ask it to create a unit test for you.
Exactly. There are tools now that do make actually creating unit tests a lot easier than what it used to be, from kind of having to manually create that, all joking aside. So these tools aren't utopia, but they do help you and they do speed things up a huge amount.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think I was going to say the buzzword was obviously fail fast. That's the buzzword you forgot, but
you can mark me down on it later. Yes.
Oh, yeah. we will fail fast in this chat. So no, that's all really good. So I think what's probably useful now, we want to talk about practically building the automation. So what do I need? How do I get started? What do I need to think about? What are the issues that I might come across as I'm starting to move towards an automation journey?
Yeah, most definitely. So my first one is to always start simple as you can. Okay. And so pick whatever is probably your biggest pain point, or maybe mark out what your top 3 pain points are, where you're spending the most time doing manual operations, where you think it might be possible to automate. and then look at those three and say, right, which one of those do we think is maybe easiest to automate out of those? Maybe pick that one. And then start simple and focus on that. The advantage of just focusing on that, because you know it's one of your top hitters, you know that you're then accomplishing something which is valuable. You'll get stakeholders buy-in by the fact that you can demo to them once you've completed that thing simple. And then the team will also feel that they're succeeding. There's nothing more demoralizing than being on a project which is lasting 2 years and you can't actually see if something's actually succeeded or not. And I guess also don't get disheartened, okay? When you build your first pipeline, okay, it will have bugs in it. It'll probably have even lots of bugs in it, and it'll probably have lots of things that it doesn't do. But the whole point is that you can harden that and continuously harden that. So you find an issue, you fix it. And then you actually put something in place to assure that doesn't happen again, like those regression tests from that side. And it's all about that repeatability. So start simple, continuously harden your pipeline as you're going along. Assure you kind of got those regression tests, so you're picking up any issues as you're going along. And then you'll just naturally gain the confidence in the technology and your pipeline as you're kind of going through that journey, which is incredibly important, both for the technical people, but also for the stakeholders, so that they can see that you are getting benefits as you're going on that journey.
So would that be, so is the first step sort of automating the bits that might already be automated in a lot of places? So think of the bar compilation. Most customers, I assume, don't build their bars in the toolkit per se anymore. Lots will use, especially if these in source code repos, would generate with like the MQSI. What was the MQSI bar command?
You're showing your age, Aiden. You know.
I know. So what was the MQSI bar command? So package up the bar. That's almost the easy bit, isn't it? What I typically would do, because the important bit is like actually going to need somewhere to run the Ace runtime. And I think people don't realize that straight away, that actually you do need the lightweight runtime, headless runtime. Is that what we call it? I don't know if the terminology has changed. The headless runtime that we have on a virtual machine or an ESX server or somewhere, even a GitLab runner, for example. You have the runtime running somewhere, and that can perform the commands, and you will need that straight off the bat. So it's important to have a think about what that's going to look like. And I would say one of the biggest pain points I find is when I come into automation journeys ever so slightly later, and there's not been enough thought put into the source repo setup, the file structure, the repository structure. And one of the issues I find then is that the automation becomes complex because it's not intuitive or it doesn't flow very well. I just wonder if you had any thoughts about structuring.
Yeah, most definitely. Like the code repository structure is a big thing, because you got to remember you've got lots of different levels. You've got your directory structures, then you've got your branching, and you've got your forks, and you've got to work out how is this going to flow. A developer is going to check in some artifacts, then you're going to build those artifacts, and you're going to store the build artifacts in a certain location, and then you're going to have another series of capabilities which are going to deploy those built artifacts to an environment, and obviously completing testing throughout all of this. So there isn't really, in my mind, a right and a wrong, but on the way that you should actually have all of this, because some people have very strong opinions, and you might go into an organization that says this is the way that we do it for all of our other CI/CD pipelines and for our particular code repository, so you must follow that. You've just got to make sure, as you say, you kind of got to walk through the problem space and say, right, how will this work so I can do a release for this, and how does this then join up with the master at that stage? So I realized that I've got a kind of consistent record of what has been deployed onto that runtime. But I completely agree with you. It's one of the most common areas that people struggle with. And again, back to starting things simple, I would say you can evolve these things, and don't be too afraid to change things, because also remember, the whole point here is you've got regression tests to rely on to actually make sure that as you move forward and you make changes, even to structures of code repositories, that you're getting a predictable outcome at the other side.
Some of that might just even be doing a bit of design thinking. So who are my users? Who are the teams that are going to be interacting with it? Do they want to be touching each other's repos? Are we best segregating them? Do they fight a lot?
Always.
Your maybe like your platform levels. So you were talking earlier about the levels, having those different levels and different repos, and then having the automation slightly different. And then you've also got to think about once you've got your automations deployed, they're deploying happily. And you were talking about the hardening. So my thought on hardening would be looking at where the right place to put approval processes are, so that an overeager team wanting to get something into production because of a fire at 2 a.m. isn't able to just, because it happens. We know it happens. You just want to try and get a fix in, and then you're not really thinking properly, and sometimes you'll have missed something. So start adding those approval processes. Anything else on that hardening side? Any specific examples you can think of?
On how to harden your pipeline over time, do you mean?
Yeah. What are some examples of what that means?
Yeah. Like a lot of it is all around the regression testing for me, and actually putting in place, as you find each individual problem, putting a new test case in there, even for the pipeline, to make sure that you are gradually improving the quality of that pipeline and fixing those issues. Now, there's many things which, as I was kind of saying, starting simple though, like you may just do the deployment or the upgrading of the software. At the same time, you then will kind of expand the pipeline instead of just hardening it to include things like maybe certificate management. So let's introduce the idea of integrating it into a certificate manager to generate a new certificate on the fly, deploying that out at the same time as your integration server so that you've got a brand new certificate there. You might look at saying, well, how do I do certificate renewals, and expanding it in that area. You may look at, right, how can I actually do the promotion through some of the earlier environments? How could I start spinning up a performance test environment like you talked about before? So there's lots of ways, not just hardening, but also then expanding from that maybe simple use case that you had to begin with.
I'm just thinking now of any meaningful advice I can give to people. Image registries in containers. When you're setting up your automations, lots of customers will use some, an artifact repository and try and build their containers from the artifact repository, pull it down, build the container. One of the issues you can have there is the startup times of containers, because you have to download the image first, then you have to start it up. You're actually creating a point of failure in your connectivity to your artifact repo. And we've hit that before at a customer. And I think it was in production. It wasn't a live system yet, but where you've not been able to pull from the artifact repository. So you better pushing your images into an image repo local to your container platform. That's probably not an automation specific, but it comes up in automation journeys a lot.
No, it's a really good point. We also saw that with another customer where, as you say, the remote online container registry just went down and wasn't available for, I think, about 12 hours. And actually in a container world, even though you may have a deployment out, depending on your setup, if something fails over for whatever reason and that worker node doesn't have that image, it may even go off at that stage to actually pull something down. And that's the last thing you would want. So yeah, your suggestion of having that locally is a really good one.
Okay, and last one I think would be make sure you think about your version strategy for how you're going to version your bar files, your images, your flows, and how that will go through your branches, like you were saying, Callum, but also how you mark them within your container platform. If you're doing containers, if you're doing VMs, you still need to version, so that's still true. Very, very last question. This one's for you, Callum. I know your previous role as a product manager for this product. The previously symbiotic relationship of IBM App Connect and MQ. So
Yes.
I think what people ask in automation is, well, do I need to deploy them in a container? Can I deploy them in one container? When would I deploy them in a single container? I'm thinking containers there, but obviously it's important from a automation perspective because you potentially add in another product into your automation pipeline. Do you have a view on?
Yeah, my personal view is that I'm a big fan of what App Connect move towards, which is a far looser dependency on IBM MQ than what it has, because they are two very different products from a scalability and a high availability standpoint for many, many use cases. Not all, but many of them. And because you have different requirements around the high availability and scalability, if you couple them together, then you have to take the lowest common denominator for scalability and high availability. If you have them loosely coupled, then you can do the right thing for each of them, and you can do them independently, and then they can communicate. So if at all possible, I would move MQ out of the ACE container, unless ACE requires it for its own internal processing, such as XA transactions, and I would have MQ deployed separately from that. So I would kind of decouple it. Then you can actually start thinking about, right, when we think about CI/CD, do we view these as two separate pipelines? I would generally probably say yes, because MQ in general is more of a, not to be confused with infrastructure we're talking about before, but more of an infrastructure capability that would be used across runtimes, rather than one which is quite often, which would be just for the App Connect when we move to that model. Now, that doesn't mean, for instance, though, in App Connect, it has no dependency, the pipeline. It could, for instance, when you deploy out a flow for App Connect, it could require a new queue to be created on MQ. So that could trigger off another pipeline for MQ, which would either create a brand new queue manager, if that was your methodology, might be a bit extreme, or it would add an additional queue to an existing queue manager and complete that as part of a pipeline against the MQ. But as much as possible, I would keep them separate, unless it is an internal dependency of App Connect to have those together.
I feel like I've thrown out a line and trying to reel you in, because like I've tried to catch you up. I haven't tried to catch you up. What I was going to say is that we have got customers who have very small, fine-grained App Connect use cases, which do use MQ, who deploy MQ with ACE. And in those cases, you 100% can. I don't want people to think you can automate them, and successfully. I think most customers we work with, though, is the style that you're talking about, which is actually MQ generally used. And maybe that's because we haven't talked about the last point. I promise it is the last point now. This is my third last point. This is my last point. Is when you're looking at automation, I wouldn't take it as a given that you could, if you're doing a migration of your existing applications, I wouldn't necessarily take it as a given that you're going to move to the same topology architecture, because with automation, you're able to, much as you were saying, it's all about being able to very quickly get upgrades, get changes to products, put security fixes out there. You can split up those applications into smaller decoupled flows, basically. So I'd review the actual composition of your flows, and you have to do that when you're automating anyway, because you have to decide which packages to bring into your deployment pipeline. So when you're doing the CD element, you have to figure out which bar files you want to bring in. That's a great time to think, am I putting too much into a single integration node or integration server? I'd use automation as a great time to actually review those service compositions.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And exactly the same what I see, which is, you want to take, if you move towards containers or just do automation or re-architecting, take it as an opportunity to see, have I got the right fine-grained deployment strategy? Have I got too many integrations in that bar file, deploying out to a single integration server? Should I have a better collection? These things grow organically over time, so it's good to take the opportunity to reflect on how they can be improved.
Perfect. Right. So to summarize, we'll give you a little brief summary. We've talked about DevOps, which includes inside of it a mixture of continuous integration and continuous deployment. App Connect is a long-standing IBM product that does great things, and many people want to automate it because they want to get the benefits like being able to do upgrades, be a bit quicker, better quality, reduce the amount of failures. If you do fail fast, automated testing, reduce cost of operation. And our advice is that you have to split those tasks up into potentially infrastructure, runtime, applications, and then the benefits you'll get from that are so big. But you can do things faster with less experience because the experience has already created those reusable pipelines. Anything to add, Callum, to my summary?
I think that was a marvelous summary.
Right, well, thank you, Callum, and thank you everyone for listening. Goodbye.